fundraising solutions. Co-leading today with me this afternoon is Byron Johnson, and running things behind the scenes is my man, John Mark Purdue, and the Queen, Lindsay. She was just holding it down for us, keeping the conversation going. So we're excited to be with you, and we're looking forward to the next hour where we'll talk about fundraising in the African American context or Black context. It's interchangeable, and it's okay to use either one of those, just in case somebody was wondering. And I want to let you know that throughout the webinar, we want to hear from you. So as we've been interacting, let's keep that going. John Mark is going to continue to keep us updated through the chat, Q&A, things of that nature. So let me give you some instructions on how to do that. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat button. This is where you can tell us who you are. We've already been doing that, where you're coming from, things of that nature, share comments. The other button that I want to draw your attention to is the Q&A button. This is where this is live. I mean, so we want to respond to your questions. We don't just want to be talking heads on the screen. So feel free to put your comments and thoughts in that Q&A box, and we'll try to respond to them as best as we can. Also, for those of you who are not experienced in coaching sessions with Tailored, we're going to give you an opportunity to experience that free. So we're offering a free session for 2 separate people. So 2 people get a chance to experience Tailored coaching session. So there's going to be a drawing at random at the end of our session, and we'll notify you by email as to who the winners are. So today we're going to talk about the need to discuss some assumptions in fundraising from Black communities. We also want to realize the importance of individual assessments and advocacy for ethnic minority missionaries, and then address some mindsets, just different mindsets that people face as they're working through fundraising. Then fourth, introduce how do we handle models and mentors when it comes to African Americans in fundraising, setting them up well with good models and mentors. And then lastly, you want to understand the unique cultural challenges that African Americans face. So first, I want to ask a question or two, okay? How many African American missionaries do you know, foreign or domestic? Give you a few seconds just to give a number. Drop it in the chat box. All right, 2, 12, 7, 5, 50. Wow. All right. Well, I tell you what, I feel like today we may need to flip the table and hear from you guys. Like, you know, who are some of these individuals? In fact, why don't we do that? Just drop one name of an individual that you know who is an African American missionary. I'm still seeing numbers: 10, 6. Todd Burks, Samantha. Wow. John Mark, you may have to keep up with that. This chat box is like on fire right now.
It is on fire.
That's great. That's great. Awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, then today's webinar is going to be pretty fun. And so now that we have a good sense of your awareness and knowledge base, we also want to, for some of you who didn't respond, there may not be as many people that you're aware of. And so if that's the case, then, you know, have you ever wondered why there are so few of them? And why, or even why the knowledge of the ones that are out there is so sparse. So today we want to take our time in this webinar to address some reasons as to why, and even discuss some of the unique challenges that we face, and how, even though it's daunting, the task of raising funds in the African American context, it is doable. And so Byron is going to pick up and talk about some of the assumptions in fundraising.
Thank you so much, Wamba, for that, I guess, kind of introduction. It was very encouraging to see some of those numbers pop up in the chat because for so many years there has been a lack of minority representation in missions, particularly from the African American or Black context. And so with that being said, to continue to answer the question as to why we may not see as many, I think one of the first things we have to think about is just some of the assumptions that we have when it comes to fundraising. And I want to start by just sharing a story. I remember probably 8 or 9 years ago, I was asked by an international mission agency to come and sit in their fundraising training for their new staff that was coming on board. And I remember this whole idea, and they were presenting all these tools, all of these opportunities that are in front of them regarding fundraising. And the thing that kept kind of resonating with me, or at least when I got to the end, it was like, man, the words that I heard come out of the presenter's mouth was this. Basically, in so many words, he said, if you do what we ask you to do, or this is how you do partner development, now go get it done. And I did everything within my to just be quiet and not yell or scream or say no. But what I walked away with is that we typically have a one-size-fits-all mentality when it comes to fundraising. It's like, hey, here's how you do it, go get it done. But there is more so than a one-size-fits-all mentality. I really think there is a one-size-fits-most reality. And so when we talk about this whole concept of fundraising, yes, there are some basics that we need to understand, and we need to be able to clearly communicate to those that we're engaging with when it comes to funding. But there is also a reality that the majority of the fundraising coaching and training that's out there, it is suited for a large portion of our culture, mostly middle, upper middle class folk. But when it comes to that minority, or when it comes to that Black or that African American, it really comes across as if it's more so of a one-size-fits-most reality. And what we come to that conclusion is that, man, we're trying to force this square peg in this round hole. And it just doesn't fit for Blacks. It doesn't fit for minorities or African Americans in general. So most, if not all of our training that's out there does work well for majority culture, which includes middle, upper middle, socioeconomic class. And so we're still trying to force that square peg in the round hole. And what begins to happen, particularly within mission agencies, we begin to say, what's the big deal? I don't see an issue. I don't see as to why this Black or this minority cannot raise funds. And so we kind of just say, we just kind of bury heads in the sand. What crisis? There's no crisis. We don't see an issue. And so my encouragement along the way is, regardless of what organization you're with, it's critical that your ministry execs, your team leaders, your support training really understand some of the unique circumstances and nuances when it comes to minorities and Blacks in fundraising. I did want to read this quote by Tim Keller. A lot of us might be familiar with Tim Keller, but just listen to what he says. He says, the evangelical world is based on raising your own support. Mission programs are all based on this idea. You go out, you raise support amongst your friends. This, of course, is systemic. It exclusively marginalizes people who aren't white. Even white people who don't think of themselves as very well off can do it. They can raise their own support. Not just Blacks, but Hispanics, Asians have trouble raising support for various cultural reasons. The whole model, support raising, privileges white people. It doesn't privilege cultures in which that kind of volunteerism works. It doesn't privilege Blacks and Hispanics who don't have well-off friends. The system assumes that everybody that goes out would have equal social power, and they don't. I would call that a big systemic problem. Very often, these huge parachurch organizations that say you have to raise support, and you come up in that power structure, haven't raised your support, then you kind of go off or go to get on staff. People don't start with the same amount of social power. We say it's a level playing field. Everybody has an equal chance. We're not giving anybody an extra leg up. What this does is immediately destroy the people who already don't have a leg up. The system is worse than the people in the system. And so what Keller is saying is he's saying the playing field's not level. And we need to realize that. And in the process of realizing that it's not level, we need to do something about it. There's another quote that was shared that's not in the slide. It says, many ignore what they don't want to deal with. Ignoring doesn't change things. It doesn't make them go away. And Keller is saying, let's not ignore it. Let's realize that there is a problem and let's do something about it. And with that being said, I'll turn it back over to Wamba and let him talk about the importance of assessment and advocacy.
Byron, before you turn over maybe us, Peter Watts has asked if you knew the article or the journal or the book that Tim Keller quoted from.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking, Peter. It actually was a Q&A. It was an interview done by Anthony Bradley. He served as the moderator, and it was Tim Keller and John Piper. And so it was actually a quote from a Q&A, not necessarily an article or a book.
Yeah, I remember watching that panel discussion, and it was pretty insightful. And so even as we talk about this issue of the challenges around fundraising, particularly for African Americans, stateside and internationally, I want to talk a little bit about assessments and advocacy. I think one of the things that we can do to really help along these lines is to have individual assessments. And those assessments are critical. They're critical for a number of reasons. One reason is just everybody has a unique history. Everybody has a unique history and unique experiences. Their background influences how they come into that context and how they engage with the process. And if you're a recruiter or if you're a trainer or supervisor, whatever the case may be, having this information will help you to better assess the situation that this young man or young lady is stepping into, their unique history, and then their unique set of circumstances. There are things that you can discover just getting to know people's story. When you understand their story, it unfolds so much of their passion, so much of their drive. It could even help through the power of the Holy Spirit unearth maybe some hidden idols that's in their heart, and you can begin to shepherd them and free them up from those things so that God can truly use them and transform their life, even as they're laboring to transform the lives of others. And so hearing their story could impact their success or failure in fundraising. What's the best route to take in partner development for this individual? That's part of their circumstances and their history, understanding that. So once you know their history through their assessments and you understand their circumstances, the second thing is advocacy. I would say that advocacy is necessary. There is almost, I can say from experience, that I would not be 16 years into full-time missionary work if I didn't have people who advocated for my family and I. I mean, being married and having 5 children and working in a context and coming from a background where I didn't know people who had that level of disposable income. Even that term is kind of misleading. Nobody has disposable income, but you get my point. The margin financially, or even the people capital, just the relational capital with people who have means And so having champions, people who would promote, people who would network for you, people who would put you in places to share your story and communicate your passion and your desire. That's priceless. I see this happening more and more often, but I just want to bring that point home, the fact that um, this is necessary. Assessments, advocacy. If we want to see the trend continue to move in the right direction, as I believe it is by God's grace, and have more representation of people of color as missionaries full time, I believe assessments and advocacy is where we have to begin.
Thank you so much, Wamba. That's you're spot on. That's been my kind of trademark the last several years, is understanding how critical assessments are, and how important Blacks in particular, and minorities in general, are in dire need of advocacy. And but with that being said, I think one of the other things we should become aware of is just some of the mindsets that Blacks face when it comes to funding. And just and I want to share this with the sense that as we understand some of these mindsets, our hope and our goal is that we would see some of these mindsets transform. But there are real mindsets that need to be at least made aware of. We need to at least be made aware of and known. And the first thing is this whole mindset of survival. When I think about survival in the African American context, fundraising typically promotes this idea of survival mentality rather than a thriving mentality. Most of us don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I'm going to be a failure today. No, we want to thrive. We want to be successful in life. And I know most of African Americans in particular, because of some of the unique challenges that we've had historically, there's that desire to want to thrive. And so partner development or fundraising doesn't produce or promote that type of mentality. It promotes more survival versus thriving. And most Blacks do desire to thrive in this world, like most of us do. And they see partner development as kind of a path of just trying to survive. So that's the first mindset we need to be aware of. The second is that of security, which is there's some similarities there. Fundraising does not necessarily produce any type of security or stability when it comes to Blacks in general. And so if we address that, we must realize that most of us long to have stability. Most of us long to have a stable income and to provide security for our families and for those. And fundraising just doesn't portray that. And so we need to address that mindset, is that it's yes, survival, security, and those that fundraise are not portrayed as being able to provide such security and stability. So that's the second mindset. The third is just this concept of a savior. And when I think about this concept, I remember just my many years of college ministry, and a lot of the college students that I was dealing with, they were often looked upon as the family savior. That's why they were in college. They wanted to be there to be able to help their family. Some of them, they may have been the first in their family to go off to college. And so there's this built-in expectation from their families to return home and kind of help lift them out of their current situation or their demise or their horrible circumstances, if you know what I mean. And so addressing that mindset and realizing, I mean, as a believer, we know there's only one Savior, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ. But it's a mindset that I think we need to address as well. And then I think the fourth thing as it relates to mindset is this whole mindset around just the sense of calling and us learning to delineate the various calls that God places on people's lives, particularly in the African American context. I remember when I graduated from college, or was about to graduate from college, and I went home to tell my parents that I felt like God was calling me into ministry, and that was gonna, require fundraising to some degree. Their first thought, call to ministry. So you're telling me you're called to be a pastor? And I would say in a lot of Black contexts, African American contexts, when someone senses a call to ministry, they kind of feel almost pigeonholed to become a pastor. And so we got to delineate the differences, that people are called to various reasons. As we know, the scripture speaks to people being called to evangelism, to being pastors, to teachers. And so when we enter into this fray, for us to enter into it outside of pastoral work, it's just foreign and it's just unheard of. And we know that the scripture says that God calls his people to various types of ministries: pastors, teachers, evangelists, missionaries. And I think we need to address those mindsets and address them head on, realizing that it's survival, security, a savior, and a sense of calling. Those four things need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed with a lot of focus and intentionality.
Yeah, that's great, Byron. I think so often those things that you were just mentioning, the mindsets, um, you know, I think that as they're addressed on the front end, kind of before you even get to the field, um, within the context of a mentor relationship, within the context of helping them to see that they're not the first person to do this. And so that's where I think models and mentors come in. I think that's probably one of the areas that historically we haven't done a good job with. Um, you know, as I think about it, like I said, 16 years in missions, I've had the great privilege of laboring alongside some people like Byron and so many other people who are African Americans, and they're giving their life away in missions, and they're making disciples, and they're sacrificing, their sense of security, and they're sacrificing even their hopes and their dreams and aspirations and ambitions in this world for the sake of the gospel. And so I guess, as you were talking about the mindsets, one of the things that's really, really disappointing is that there is an assumption that when African Americans talk about these things, that they're being materialistic. That's not spiritual. To talk about, security, to talk about savings, to talk about leaving a heritage for your family, taking care of your family and things of that nature. And so being able to expose them to models, people who have done it, who are doing it, kind of alleviates that. It helps them to see, like, yeah, this is a godly mandate for me to be fruitful and multiply and to extract potential in the world. And it doesn't have to be compromised because I'm, partner doing fundraising or partnership development. And so this idea of exposing them to other models and other mentors will help them to see that they're not the first, they're not the only, and by God's grace, they won't be the last. So expose them to other people who are engaged in missions. I think that's paramount. It has to be. It's kind of on par with the idea of the assessments and things of that nature. So exposing them to models, but then also enlightening African Americans to the fact that they are not the first. They are not the only. And you can do this through just tapping into history. History, just is full of examples of African Americans in missions. George Lau was the first American missionary in 1782. The first missionary to be sent out from America was George Lau. And Patrick Cuffey, 1811. Daniel Coker in 1820. Lot Carey in 1821. I mean, there is a list of people, and there's probably more that could be added to it. As you guys mentioned early on in the chat box, some of you guys mentioned over 10 missionaries that and so we could probably have a whole webinar just on that and informing people and using that as a tool and a resource to help build out this exposure and enlightenment for African American missionaries and any minority missionaries for that matter, because to know that it's not just something that's been exclusively explored by whites is incredible. You find your place in God's grand narrative because you see people who look like you, who you can relate to, and it gives you a sense of confidence. And so as we talk about that, the models and the mentors, exposing them and enlightening them is a huge, huge component.
Yeah, absolutely, Wamba. I can remember early days of my call to ministry. I remember a good friend sharing with me a story, and the question that came to kind of to a head was, where are the African American missionaries? And at that time, I didn't know any, and couldn't really put my finger on it. But as I began to do a little research and begin to engage, I began to discover some of those things. So that enlightening piece is extremely important. Well, with that being said, there's one other thing I'd like for us to just kind of highlight, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. But as we begin to wrap up our time together, there's some historical challenges I think that we need to be aware of when it comes to this fundraising in the Black context. And when I talk about these historical challenges, they're huge in some regards, but they are things that we need to be willing to tackle head on and not just allow what has happened to continue to happen. And the first thing I would say is just the first historical challenge is just the church, the Black church, the African American church. And particularly in the last, I'd say, half a century or so, the Black church has been very consumed with what's going on in their community. And there's nothing wrong with that. The challenge is, can it become not just what's going on locally, but what's going on globally? Can we challenge our churches to look beyond just what's going on in their community? But no, can we encourage them to go beyond that? One of the things that I've tried to do over the last 7 or 8 years is I've engaged, particularly African American pastors, is I want to help them see beyond the 4 walls of their church and the 4 blocks, what they might call their community, and get into the 4 corners of the world. And so historically, there are some things that we need to be aware of when it comes to the African American church. Now, rightfully so. When you think about the history of the African American here in the United States, it made a lot of sense for the church to do a lot of kind of thoughts on taking care of their community, because no one else was taking care of our community. No one else was committed to our community. And so therefore, the church played that significant role. That's the first thing in terms of challenging. And the second one kind of goes along with it. I've kind of alluded to some of it. It's just the community. How do we get our community involved in not just what's going on in our church, but what's going on around our world? And so historically, as I said earlier, one of the challenges there is that we've been really committed to our community. We've been really committed, whether it's trying to, uplift our neighbors, whether it's trying to provide jobs for people within our community, whether it's providing opportunities for them to connect and to be engaging with one another. There are some historical community challenges that we need to continue to address, to say, hey man, let's get beyond what's going on in our community. And God kind of says that in when we talk about Acts 1:8, you shall be your witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and to the othermost parts of the world. Yes, we want to start in our community, but man, can we look beyond our community? God's doing something on a global scale, and I think He's wanting our community to be part of that. Historically, we've kind of dealt with what's going on more locally, but man, can we get beyond our community? And then I would say the other challenge, the final challenge, and trust me, there are many, many more. Time will not permit today for us to talk about them. But one of the things I think where we have challenges when it comes to African Americans and fundraising is this concept of just their mistrust of the white culture, of majority culture. And and that just, there's enough history out there that would cause you to understand why African Americans, Blacks, have a difficult time trusting majority culture. Slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights, the list go on and on. Killings today, there's still some of the injustices that are going on within our society. So none of us are blind to the fact that there's some mistrust amongst majority culture. And so we see this kind of parlay itself out in fundraising as well. One of the things that quote talked about with Keller is, and Wamba kind of alluded to this in this whole need for advocacy, is a lot of our Black staff, our Black missionaries, man, they're having to cross cultural lines to go get their support or to go get to do fundraising. And man, there's just something there that makes that a little bit difficult, particularly when there's an area of mistrust. And so I think if we can address some of these historical challenges as it relates to the church, to the community, and the mistrust of majority culture, then I think we can begin to see some headway, some progress made amongst Blacks and as it relates to fundraising and getting to the mission field, and not only getting to the mission field, but being able to stay on the mission field because they're able to stay fully funded. And so those would be the three primary challenges that I want to allude to today. As I said earlier, there are probably a handful that we could talk about, but those three in particular. And so, and with that being said, man, thank you so much for joining us today. We want to open up for a time of Q&A. So Wamba and I are here to try to answer some of your questions. And one of the things I've learned down through the years is that, we always say Q&A. I think I'm growing to like more Q&R versus Q&A, question and response, because I don't think I have all the answers. And Wamba would probably say the same thing, but I understand what we're trying to get at. We're going to provide some answers, and we're going to respond to some of your questions. And one of the questions I would love to address, I think Callie Davis presented this question. It says, is anything in support raising training cross-cultural or universal, or does everything need to be rethought? Man, great question. And there are some that would say, man, let's just ditch it all. And my initial thought was, no, we don't want to necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some things that we can learn from the training that's out there. Where I think the challenge is we've become almost pigeonholed as to think this is the only way to do it. And so, yes, you still have to reach out to people and make contacts or make phone calls and things of that nature. So that's just, part of the process. But I think where we struggle in terms of the support raising training, particularly as it relates to minorities and Blacks, is it's hard for us to help them see some of the unique challenges that they're going to face as a minority. And that's why that assessment that Wamba spoke of is so important. Because if you got we'll just hypothetically say, if you have an African American that grew up in suburbia, Atlanta, and went to, say, majority white schools or majority culture schools, and and maybe went to a majority cultural church. He's going to have some challenges, yes, as a minority, but his role may be a little bit easier for, say, that person that grew up in the urban context, the inner city context. Not that urban person cannot raise support, but if I don't understand those unique challenges between the guy in suburbia and the guy in the urban context, then I just come in with this mindset is, here's how you raise support, so go get it done. No, I want to address some of the unique challenges that each one of those people are going to face. So do we rethink it all? Not necessarily, but we need to rethink some aspects of it.
Yeah, I would agree. I would totally agree with what you're saying on that, Byron. I think in addition to that, I think addressing the realities of the difference in the experiences of those two individuals that you just talked about. It is a person who grows up in a majority white culture that is Black, and then a person who grows up in African American culture who's African American. Their experiences are different, and so that affects how they go about fundraising and the people that they connect with. Yes, that's what you were talking about, their natural networks, but even their perceptions of fundraising as a whole. Um, there could be some advantages to either situation, but the reality is, I don't think that many organizations that are bringing these individuals on are asking those types of questions. And so there needs to be a process in place to begin to help unearth some of those issues and bring it to the surface so that it's something that we address even before we get into the hiring process. Part of them evaluating, because I think we waste a lot of time and resources recruiting and training people, and they don't necessarily have the right perspective going into it, and some of that has to do with their upbringing and experiences in that way. But yeah, great question. There's a few other ones here. Let's see, John Mark, if you can.
There are quite a few others. I know one kind of in general, but Callie asks if there's a resource from where you got some of the missionaries that have gone out, or how to get, I guess, really in contact with those resources.
Yeah, great question. I say Byron has a thesis paper for his doctorate that he is working on, and so he might give you a rough draft for it. I'm joking.
Yeah, I'm going to get that doctor about the same time you get yours, so we'll work on it together. No, great question. I would say this. I mean, the pat answer is Google it. You can find a lot just doing some Google searches, but there are some resources out there that are slowly becoming available to that will communicate a lot of this information. I know the Southern Baptist Church has created some resources that highlight some of these particular missionaries. But you have to go, for lack of a better word, you got to go digging, and they're not just on the surface. You got to go deep, and so I will trying to think how I can make some of these resources available to get to you guys. But
yeah, I think one of the follow-up emails from this, I think John Mark is sending out a couple other quotes that we had and things of that nature. So we may just tag a few things on there. But honestly, I think asking the question and being willing to get a little dirt under your nails, like Byron said, to go digging. Hopefully this won't be a problem or a challenge that we pass off to the next generation. It'll be like, oh yeah, I've got tons of resources there available. But yeah, great question. It's always a good one.
And some have put in the chat box some suggestions. One is connecting with the National African American Missions Council. They can introduce you to African American missionaries. There's a link to in your chat to another one, as well as Ron and Star Nelson of Sowing Seeds of Joy are mobilizing and discipling Black agency who could also help introduce others. So most of you may have seen that. So here's another question though, and this comes from Adrian. How do you help change the way fundraising is done, therefore one size fits all, for Black or other individuals of color who want to serve in missions? Do you have strategies that you are recommending to mission agencies to consider? I know many Black Christians who would love to serve in missions, but fundraising is a barrier.
Yeah, this is honestly one of the things with Vision 938 that we want to try to overcome. Byron, you've done some work with other mission organizations, kind of talking about this to some extent. Could you share like some of your experiences there? What did you recommend for them?
Yeah, thanks, Wamba. I will say this. I think that's the $1 million question. I think every mission agency that I've engaged with is asking that question. They want to know, how can we get more minorities? How can we get more Blacks engaged in our work, engaged in missions? And so if I had $1 for every time I was asked that question, I'd be a millionaire by now, more than likely. But with that being said, I do think it's critical for those mission agencies to at least open their eyes to at least exploring, hey, are there other avenues, are there other paths that we can take to aid, to come alongside, to introduce our people, our minorities, to not only who we are, but are there other opportunities that we can put out there for them to be more successful at partnering, more successful at fundraising? And so I would say part of it starts with just realizing that, hey, this one size fit all, it's just not working for our minorities, for our Blacks, for our Hispanics, for our, Latinos and Asian. It's just not working.
Yeah.
We got to own that as an agency. And when
we need to lament that.
And lament. And when we own it and there's a period of lament, then we begin to say, okay, God, now give us fresh ideas, give us fresh opportunities to be able to rework maybe some of the things that we've done in the past. And so I think the onus is on the mission agency to come to grips with, hey, maybe there is another way to skin that cat, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I know a number of agencies have created kind of like a fund for, minority missionaries to kind of help offset some of the overall cost for them to be on staff, and that helps for sure. I think another thing I would suggest is, you know, in that type of effort, when you're raising funds and you have a fund or pool of resources that is kind of earmarked for a particular group of people, I think you have to do a good job of informing everyone else who isn't benefiting from that what this fund is actually working to counteract. So there has to be education on both sides, because what can happen is this sense of privilege. Well, they get that, but I've got to raise the same amount of money, and it's hard for me too. I don't come from a rich background, yada yada yada, and you realize that there can be some dissonance there that can develop. So those are just things to kind of, as you're thinking and building these things out, and we could probably talk offline. I'm sure Byron and I could help think through some of those strategies, that there are things that your organization is working on. But there are alternative strategies and ways to go about doing it that doesn't completely get rid of the model that we're using, but it does help offset some of the disadvantage that ethnic minorities may come into the game with.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and let me add one last thing to that, Wamba. I think you brought up a great point where the privileged might think, or a particular group might think, well, why provide something unique for, say, a minority? I've got to do the same thing. I got to raise support, yada yada yada. I think the thing that we fail to realize is how much our culture has influenced us in this arena of fundraising. We are an individualistic culture. And so it's like, all right, you go get yours, I'll go get mine. But the Bible, just destroys that mindset when you talk about the body of Christ. We're not all an arm, we're not all a leg or a head. We're all different parts. So we all come into the game in a different space, in a different place. And we need to realize that. And we need to be able to say, okay, how can I help my brother or my sister? Because we're in this together. This is the body working, not me individually. And so I think dealing with that cultural mindset of just individualism has played a major role in some of the challenging, difficult, wrong-headed thinking that you alluded to.
Yeah, I see one. I don't know if you had already, John Mark, pick one out question, but there was one that I saw on here from Nancy. If you didn't already have one, I'd like to.
Go right ahead.
Okay. So Nancy brought up, I think it's Donette. Beyond working to build deeper relationships, can you give some thoughts on how to build trust between majority cultural missions groups and minorities who are feeling called to missions? I know there are multiple layers here, but would love to hear a bit more building trust. Yeah, when I saw that question, I was reading through it, and I think you hit it on the head when you ask about the issue of trust. I think that's paramount in asking someone to labor with you, alongside you, to forego other pursuits and other agencies to kind of put their hand to the plow next to you, next to your agency. There is a good deal of trust that needs to be built there. How to build that trust? It's kind of like any relationship. It takes time. But I can tell you that the first relationship is usually the most important. And again, it goes back to what we talked about early on with exposure and mentors and models. If you are able to successfully, nurture and equip and resource one ethnic minority missionary, or two, and begin to allow them to be an advocate for your agency and say, here's a place where you will not only be called to labor, but you will be loved. And that, I think, even when we talk about coaching, this idea of partnership development is so much more than just the resources, so much more than just the funds. We're talking about missions. This is missions in the context of fundraising. I mean, this is discipleship in the context of fundraising. I feel so strongly about that I think we miss it. We miss it because we know that we have numbers that we have to meet and bills we have to pay, so forth and so on. But no one is ever compelled by paying your bills, and they won't stay because you pay their bills. But if they know that you love them, and if they know that you are there for them, that you have their best interests in mind, and you show it, that will give the longevity with that relationship. and it will begin to build bridges, to their friends and their, colleagues and other people who are like-minded. And so in many ways, it's partnership development in reverse. They become an advocate for your agency
Mm.
in the same way as they ask individuals to be advocates for them in fundraising.
Yeah.
So just a quick thought. Sorry about that. Might not have been too quick.
Yeah, and only thing I would add to that one, but is for those mission agencies that do have minorities currently working with them, my admonition to you is say, man, take care of them. Make sure they are well taken care of. And because if they're taken care of, then they will, as Wamba was saying, you kind of got that reverse ingenuity where they are now advocates for you. And they're bringing people into the organization because they feel like they've been taken care of. So for those agencies that currently have minority staff, make sure they're taken care of. And then not only that, but make sure that they're being heard, they're being listened to. And then you're taking in, it's like, okay, help us. And it's not help us just to kind of, ease our conscience or to, to maybe satisfy some guilt that we might own, but no, really take the time to listen and to learn from your minority staff and to learn from the minorities that you're going to be engaging with, rather than just, okay, let's see how we can diversify our team. Well, you can't do that without listening and learning from those who are different.
Yeah, definitely. Great point. What we can probably take one more, and then we'll close out and get a few highlights from today. Let's see, John Mark, did you get one?
Well, yes. I mean, you're right. There's so many good questions. But
see it.
Mike asked this earlier, and Mike is a missions mobilizer, and he asked, how can I help my Black and minority recruits talk to their churches? If the church does not have a vision for international missions, how can my recruit help them to develop one?
All right, Mike, great question. I wish I could read it. That would be a little more helpful. Can you read that one more time for me, John Mark?
Yes, it's in the chat, but
it's
he
in the
said,
chat. Okay, I'm looking in the Q&A, sir.
Yeah, but he asked, how can I help my Black and minority recruits talk to their churches? If the church does not have a vision for international missions, how can my recruit help them to develop one?
Yeah. Do you want to jump on that, or can I?
Yeah, I'll jump on it. It starts with one, and yes, there are. I think about a church in particular here in Atlanta, and it's a church plant. It's been around now for about 15 years. And from the early stages, that church began to kind of chew on this mission global kind of work. And as a result, they're now partnering with missionaries all around the world. And they're not just partnering with them like, $100 a month. I mean, no, they're giving significantly to this. And so it starts with that one church, that one individual with the church, the pastor in the church saying, okay, we're going to get excited about this. So one of the things that I think has happened, or one of the things that can happen is introducing that church to a minority missionary. I'm working with a church in Birmingham right now, and they're a church plant. They have a heart for missions, but they don't know any minority missionaries. So I'm engaging them myself, but I'm also saying, Let me introduce you to others. And so, man, they're passionate about missions. They just don't know anyone. And so, engaging them, introducing them to, as one would say, those models and mentors in a sense that are out there. And then I think the other thing is realize that, man, very few things change overnight. And so we've got to be patient, and patience is so critical. And so I can't get frustrated with my church, or I can't get frustrated with the Black church because they don't have a global awareness. Let me pray for them. Let me put myself in a position to continue to highlight global missions and to highlight people going into ministry that requires partner development and things of that nature. So it starts, as we would say, within, my one of the organizations I used to work for. Let's start small, think big, and go deep. Start small with just, hey, is there one or two people that we can introduce? Think big, man. We want them to think global. Think, man, and that's what this church in Birmingham, he said, man, I want to see missionaries come from my city and my church that are going to go into all corners of the world. That's thinking big. But then we got to go deep. And that goes back to, man, let's continue to invest in those that we know, those that we are connected to, and begin to get that story out and keep that story going. Those are some of my initial thoughts. Juan, but feel free to add anything to that as well.
No, actually, you did a great job. And we're coming to the top of the hour here, so I know people may have to go. But before we go, I love to just have a few minutes just to reflect a little bit on this experience today. And if there's one thing that you walk away with today, I'd love for you to share it in the chat. Just one new thought, one new perspective, or new angle on looking at something, or just a new reminder. We'd love for you to share that. So we'll take a few minutes to let you guys respond there. And then while you're doing that, I love to just take that moment to invite you to next month's webinar, because this month we focused on the Black context in fundraising. Next month, we like to invite you to a webinar talking about 5 reasons to raise funds in Latin America. We'll be doing one in English and one in Spanish. So see, Tailored is growing and learning how to diversify their approach. So join us. We'll be doing this, like I said, one in English, one in Spanish, and the registration links to sign up will be added to the chat box. The English one will be at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, and the Spanish will be at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. I also want to remind those of you who have not experienced the coaching session with Tailored, that we're offering a free session for 2 separate people. There will be a drawing at random, and hopefully you'll be one of those 2. We'll notify you by email if you are. And for real-time updates and for free resources, follow us on social media. That slide will be coming up shortly, but Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, the website, all of these different mediums are available for you all to get free resources and to be up to date on the conversation around fundraising. So it's been great today to be with you guys. I hope that you're walking away with some valuable information regarding fundraising in the Black context. And just want to thank you for joining us, for taking out this time in the middle of life and whatever else you had going on. You chose to be here with us, and I hope you're better for it. So let's see, any highlights down here? Let's see, 25. Ooh, yeah.
A lot of them. A lot of them. Thank you guys so much. And we're grateful that you have some takeaways. And so.
Good stuff. Well, any final thoughts? Anything? Let's let me just read one highlight. Olis Malzahn says the challenges for mission agencies to recognize the real differences. That was a highlight for him. To recognize the real differences, the real challenges that mission agencies need to recognize. Good stuff. All right. Well, hey, we're going to wrap up our time for today. And again, hope that you join us next month. Stay tuned. Check your mailbox, your inbox. The panelists, or excuse me, the participants who will win the new sessions, the 2 free sessions, will be in there shortly.